I'm Christina and welcome to Breaking Out of Breaking In, a practical filmmaking podcast about taking your creative career into your own hands and making great work that gets seen without playing the Hollywood game.
Or at least while changing the rules. Hi, I'm Brie Castellini, your other co-host, and today we're breaking down professional jealousy. Before we dive in, we once again want to plug our new free monthly newsletter, which you can sign up for at the bottom of breakingoutpod.com, which also gets you a bunch of cool free downloads right away as soon as you subscribe. So head on down under. But for the purposes of this episode, let's just get right to it. Christina, why did the topic of professional jealousy speak to you? This was something that we, I think, tossed around in our trailer episode when we were still deciding what this episode was going to be. And that was the one that you were like, now I feel like I have the most to say about this topic. So why is that?
Well, I think it was very busy over the kind of last week of 2021 with posts like online. It was just people were posting all about their accomplishments of the year. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it was career focused. And it was just on my mind, I guess, is the point, you know? And I felt like that's something that we all struggle with a little bit because we're in a world where you have to be like self-promotional in order to catch people's attention because you never really know where like an opportunity is going to come from. So part of it is just like bragging mm-hmm. to people who follow you who are mostly your friends and peers, you know, but it's like making sure that you're top of mind for people. And part of that looks like just flaunting. And that's not really what it is. I think most people are just either really happy and excited and they want to share that, or they're being strategic, like I just said, where it is about making sure that you stand out when you need to stand out to who you need to stand out to. But when you're looking at your peers and you're maybe not where you want to be or you're there where you want to be, it can be hard. And I think that that's something we don't talk about enough as artists. And I think is just very relevant in a world where we're living so online over the past 2 years.
Sure.
And Shay, friend of the pod, very early on had asked we cover the topic. And I don't think...
Oh, I didn't remember that.
Yeah, we just kind of... never got to it, but they had mentioned that was something they really struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, I think, something unique to our industry, not professional jealousy as a concept, but the way that it manifests, because like jealousy is rarely rational. It's almost always a projection of something else. But like what complicates it in the entertainment industry is that like, you know, if we worked at a traditional 9-to-5, you know, corporate structure, you could be jealous of someone like getting a promotion ahead of you. But like there is a fairly linear path that everyone at this company takes if you mm-hmm. want to like stay at the company and continue moving up. You know what you have to do. You know you have to hit your sales quotients or, you know, whatever that is, and you will move up. And if like the regular pace of your promotions doesn't seem like the same as somebody else's, then either you're being discriminated against mm-hmm. or you literally just have not accomplished the thing. So like it's a very linear, clear-cut reason why someone else is doing better than you usually. In film and television and in writing and storytelling, that's not the same thing, you know? There's this weird intermingling of like, it's not only like, ah, shit, that person has a job that I want, or they got a specific opportunity I want, or they have a general opportunity that I would love to someday have myself. A lot of times, especially in I think our worst moments, it also becomes a reflection on like, what are they doing that I'm not mm-hmm. in a way that isn't as easy to measure. You know, mm-hmm. we submitted to all the same contests. They're just better than me, you know, and I don't think that really exists in other, not in the same way, certainly in like non-creative fields where it's not like, oh, this person's getting promoted because they're better than you. This person's getting promoted because they've worked here 10 years and they always hit their sales targets, you know, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And here it's so subjective.
Right, exactly.
And it's constantly an identity crisis.
Yeah, it's so subjective and there aren't clear steps to take, like, either you did the thing or you didn't, and you've gotten to the next level. It is just so, it's so subjective, and it's so impossible to know what's going into the decision making because there's mm-hmm. no transparency on that side of things, like why something got selected. And you know, I'm sure it's great, but it maybe got selected over something equally great because it was so timely for this particular year, or there was nothing else like it,
Mm-hmm.
or there was last year and there will be next year.
Or the random 3 underpaid script readers happen to really jive with the specific thing you had written.
Right,
you
right.
know?
Yeah, it's so hard to gauge what it is that is giving one person a leg up in any given situation in our industry, whatever, what if it's a contest, if it's a job, that it's hard to, I don't know, it's hard, I think, to just like contextualize what it means for you and your
Mm-hmm. And learn from it and improve. Like it's not as simple as like, oh, they got, they have gotten into a writer's room because of like these 2 things. And if I do those 2 things this time next year, I will be in a writer's room. Like it's not that simple. And so it becomes this like you go down a rabbit hole where you're like generally just sort of jealous of like, man, I wish I had that career. And then like the more you think about it and the more you try to interpret from your jealousy of this other person or group of people, then, it gets more and more subjective from there. Like, was my writing not good enough? Did I submit to the wrong contest? Did I, but there's ultimately no way to know, what it is that is holding you back when other people are not.
Yeah. I think it's also just an industry built on sort of scarcity and competition when there doesn't necessarily need to be, because it is like hoarding of wealth and
opportunities, giving, shows to the people who make the same fucking show over and over and over again, who just hire their friends. And I feel like we talked about this in a previous episode. I don't remember which one it was, but I know we talked about, you specifically talked about, maybe it was our career update episode where you were talking about how you were up for a staffing opportunity and the showrunner ended up going with somebody that they already worked with. And you were like, I can't even really be mad because I would probably also do that.
Yeah.
And we constantly do that on our own sets.
Right.
But it does create this weird thing where it's like, but if that boss is the only one getting hired to make new shows, then only the people they already know and like one random lottery winner will ever have opportunities.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Exactly. And so obviously there's the rational, like telling yourself that and understanding that intellectually versus how you feel. And those are 2 different things. So I do try and tell myself that often, like I'm not really competing with that person and they deserve what they've gotten and I can be happy for them and I can also have that too, like that's how the system should be, right? But I can also feel like, what about me? And sometimes that's human. That's it's hard not to, again, because of everything we just said, where it's like you have it in your face so much, because it's also an industry where you have to share your wins and you're not really going to talk about your losses or your rejections quite as much.
Certainly not until you're at a point where like those are a cool anecdote rather than like a validation of your own failure. Because like if at our level, maybe depending, but like certainly for future things we want to do. If at our level we shared, publicly every screenplay contest rejection, every time we didn't get a job, like if we shared all of that right now, it would be weighted towards, I think these girls are delusional. They probably shouldn't be doing this. And that doesn't mean that our rejection pile isn't as big as everyone else's, but like that's not what you want to lead with when you know that, as we know from screenwriting Twitter, people are paying attention to your social media accounts. And if all you're sharing is your losses, like, hooray, transparency, sure, but that's not a good look. I don't want my failure to be the thing that people associate with me, not unless I spin it into my brand and I become like queen of fails and like turn that into a huge success, which I'm honestly not that interested in. So maybe come back to me on that idea.
I do try, when I'm having a lot of wins, like if I'm on the circuit with a film and I'm getting into a lot of festivals, and so I'm just like sharing acceptance after acceptance after acceptance, I do try to balance it out by saying like, okay, but I also got X amount of rejections, but that's easier.
But that's in context. That's in context of success.
Exactly. I'm not doing that when I haven't gotten any successes lately, because then I'm just sharing my failure. And I also think, I don't know, I think there's like, could be camaraderie, like people would chime in and be like, me too. But I try not to dwell too much in rejection, because I don't think that that's healthy. Like if I think it, if there was bias involved, I definitely want to
Sure.
talk about that. Or if I'm just like looking for a boost, then maybe I would talk about that. But otherwise, I try to live my life in a way where I don't let it affect my day. And so I think
Hmm.
putting it out into the world and then getting a bunch of people being like, you're still great, like, don't give up, would keep it on my mind.
Sure. And also, it's another context matters things where it's like you and I probably share more about our individual failures just privately or to
Hmm.
groups of closer friends.
Yeah.
I think we're both in a Facebook group that talks about like festival rejections and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But again, that's with a very specific group of people with the sole purpose of kind of keeping tabs on that kind of thing and each
Hmm.
other.
Yeah.
But like it's another thing to make your public brand, or not even public brand, but just like regularly publicly talking about failure. To what end?
Hmm. Right.
So is there anyone that came to mind when we were talking about the idea of this episode, of people who you feel you consider yourself professionally jealous of, strongly or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because jealousy is like a hard word because I have such a negative connotation with it, and
Sure.
I don't feel like seething jealousy towards anyone.
Right.
But I definitely have arrogant moments with some people where I'm like, I'm just as good at this particular thing as them, but I don't have that thing. And I'll say like two of them, one of them is previous guest and one of them is an upcoming guest, and they're Kim Garland and Heather Taylor, and they're two
Mhm.
people who are writing for TV in horror. And so like that of course is something when I see their posts, I'm so happy for them, and they're so deserving of the success that they've had. And also I'm like, I so like the longer conversation is like I want that out of in a vacuum, but then when I look at their lives around it, I'm like, I don't actually want to do what they're doing to get those specific things. So like there's nothing to be jealous of, right?
Well, it's also you can't, both of them, obviously Kim did indie stuff. Did Heather do indie stuff first?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
did you know them from the indie scene first? And I think
Correct.
that's
Yeah.
also complicated, when like you sort of come up to like, own your voice together at the same level, and
Mhm.
then people move forward
Mhm.
in specific ways, like whether or not, it was because they moved to LA or because of, X, Y, and Z, still doesn't change the fact that it's like we started together, but now.
Yeah. But I think like it's interesting because Heather's someone who is an upcoming guest, so
Mhm.
our listeners don't know her story yet, but she is someone who's very good at sharing her work process on social media. Like her Instagram stories will be her with her note cards on her wall, and she's like breaking a new story and blah blah blah. And I'm like sitting cuddling my cat while I'm looking at her story, and I'm like, I don't like I when I have that drive, I'm in it, but she's doing it fucking day and night. At least that's what it looks like from her
Sure.
Instagram. And so I'm like, yeah, like she deserves that more than me because I'm not doing that, you know? And
Mhm.
and so I think that in some ways like it's helpful to see like the work, because I think most of the time people only share the success and they're not sharing the work and like the
Mhm.
hustle and what they're maybe sacrificing. And so I like that she's got that balance because like she's showing you how hard she's working for her success that she's experiencing right now.
Mhm. Well, I think it's also a matter of like, but you don't know what she's not posting. You don't
Right, I
know
don't.
if
Yeah.
she's literally doing that right now or if this was curated from before. And maybe we'll ask her these questions because I'm always curious about that. Because
Yeah.
like for me, if I'm in it, like I'm just in it. I'm not thinking about posting about it.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
until afterwards. And also I'm just not that kind of documenter of my own life. Like
Mhm.
I'm a social media user to a pretty extreme extent, but like in a very different way.
Mhm.
I tend to only post about like work stuff after it's happened. And that's always a problem because then I'm like, well, shit, I don't have like 3 pictures that would be really cool to have. But I'm not thinking about myself as a brand. I'm thinking of myself as like, I'm updating all of my friends on I wrote a new pilot, or
Mhm.
whatever.
Right.
And like, so people might not think I work hard. And that's something I'm sensitive about is like, shit, am I posting on social media enough to justify how hard I'm working? especially since I'm not getting anywhere. It's like, well, if anyone wonders like why I'm not successful, they just have to look at my Twitter feed and it's just fucking Wordles at this point. And like me retweeting like sassy memes about only getting 4 at-home COVID tests per household.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, what is this idiot doing?
Right. I mean, I'm also saying, like, as I say this, I'm downplaying how hard I work as well. I just don't document it. And I'm like not up at the crack of dawn doing it. I'm staying up late doing it most of the time. I think, you know, I used to be much more active on social media in terms of like the process, because I found a certain level of motivation in accountability by being like, I'm going to do a thing and I'm telling the world, so I'll follow through on it. I've gotten better at like not needing that. And so then I post less. But I wonder the same as you. Then it's like, does it look like I'm not doing anything then? But it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if that's going to be the difference between us getting like fabulous television jobs and not, then like, was it worth it? But like, I'm still, when I'm at work and I'm taking like a break in between doing work stuff, even if it's on a weekend, because my laptop is in a room where if you walk into the room, you can see what I'm doing on my laptop. Like if Quinn comes into the room in the middle of a work day or in the middle of a Saturday where I said I've been working and I'm watching a YouTube video, like just like, you know, in between doing something else, even if I've been working the whole time, I will switch tabs guiltily like I've been caught. And it's like, I'm fucking 30 years old. This is my fiance. He would probably be thrilled to find me, you know, watching a YouTube video rather than working. Yeah. But like my first impulse is like, no, I must only be seen working, because then, you know, otherwise, why am I doing, you know, I'm a liar. I'm not really working. Everyone's going to find out that I'm a fraud. And like, this is only tangentially related to professional jealousy, but I think it's part of it because like, I know the absolute insanity that's going on in my own head. I can only imagine that some amount of that is happening in other people's heads, and I'm only seeing the result of their work. I'm not walking in on them while they're watching a YouTube video because they can't be bothered to edit their, you know, their script like they thought they were going to today. Right. And so, you know, in my more self-aware moments, I try to remind myself of like the handful of people in my life who still have this idea of me as a hyper-productive, very like even-keeled person who's just like always working, and remind myself how that doesn't feel true to me. But if you only see me through a certain lens, it might appear true to people who are not aware. So yeah, in my self-aware moments, I remind myself of that. But I have, you know, depending on the day, fewer of those than others. I would say for my part, and because as you guys know now, I write long notes in our episode descriptions, in our episode outlines that Christina usually reads beforehand. I have 2 categories of professional jealousy for me, with the same caveat that like, this isn't like a seething, you know, I stay up at night, like whispering their names like Arya Stark or something. But like my first category is like my pie in the sky, like people who are like genuinely like extremely successful and established, who there's no like semblance of relation to. But I would say like my big 3 are Mindy Kaling, Rachel Bloom, and Brennan Lee Mulligan, because there are 3 people who have a career that I would love, like a very specific thing that they do, a voice that they have, a genre that they work in, that I would also love to do. And I also feel like all 3 of them, I know their story, and all of them came up through not similar means to me. Like Brennan Lee Mulligan's mom is a sci-fi author, and you know his family was in the arts, but all of them came up through like a combination of like indie work, internet specific work, kind of off kilter, very like voicey stuff that they then got discovered off of, or like they got connected to someone who saw their like weird little indie things and like moved them up. You know, like Rachel Bloom was making comedy music videos and like freelanced for Cracked to make like little sketches and stuff, and has like a very distinct voice that I feel is similar to what I want to do. Mindy Kaling is Mindy Kaling. She gets to basically do whatever she wants at this point. She has so many shows. She gets to experiment. She gets to act when she wants. She gets to direct when she wants. Like she gets to run her own shows. Right. amazing. Of course, who wouldn't want to be Mindy Kaling in our world? And then Brenna Lee Mulligan is the game master for Dimension 20, which is an actual play D&D show that College Humor does. But he also started as a writer at College Humor, a performer, and like he has a very cool, varied career. And all of them had made indie stuff at some point. I think Mindy Kaling never made an indie film, but did obviously her Matt and Ben play that got her initial acclaim. And so like all of these people had paths that relative to my own feel not unattainable, which makes me feel worse about their success and my relative lack of it. That's why they're on my list.
That's fair. I guess I don't really like feel jealous of people that are at a level like that, because a few things, like, of course I'm fans or I admire people at certain levels, but most of the people who do work that I want to do fit into like 3 categories. One, they came into the industry when it was a very different type of industry where like you could break in a very different way. Of course, it was mostly for then like white men, cishet white men primarily, but it was like there was less competition because it was more exclusive, I guess, which does it, so it wasn't better. It was only better if you were a white dude. So, but it's not applicable to me. So it's like, I'm not going to be jealous of that. That's not even like, what is that, And then the other one is they're actors who are creators. So like those are the people that are most indie that break in. So like even Mindy Kaling and Rachel Bloom and Issa Rae and like those types of people, I love them. I can't be them. Like I can't do what they do. I'm not an actor. And part of why they broke in is because they were this like triple threat that I'm not.
And they had different options for getting discovered in ways. I mean, but my thing is like I have acted. I've acted in my 2 longest. So I think that's also like that's why these are my list, because they are people who like, if I could just, become an alien slug and take over their life, like I just would. And I feel like it would be awesome because I would feel fulfilled from what I see from the outside. And I don't feel like any of these people had a particularly, at least to my knowledge, like, over easy time doing it. You know what I mean? Like none of them, none of them are like Spielberg's daughter. Right.
Like, that was the other point I was going to make, is the third category is, of course, just nepotism. They were born into it. They have already existing access. I do think that middle category, though, there's wealth there often, a lot of the time.
Certainly.
So, that's something that you can like at least feel better about.
I mean, and I want to be clear again, like I don't whisper their names to myself before I go to sleep at night. Like this isn't like every time I see them, I'm like, how dare you? I should have your life. But like, if I'm being honest with myself, the people who like, and all of these people had success, not like relatively like in their 20s. And I'm like a week away. I'm 10 days away from turning 30, and I know that's not actually that old. Really but, I think there's a part of everyone who started wanting to do art early enough that they kind of think, ooh, I'll do it early. If I knew when I was 18 that I wanted to do this, or something like that, like in the next couple of years, like certainly before I turn 30, I'll make it big. Or if not make it big, like at least I'll have made progress. And these are people who did and who didn't have obviously the exact same path as me, but had one that is semi-comparable. And it wasn't so long ago that it was like, it was the 50s. If you smoked enough cocaine in the right rooms, you got a writer's room job. Like, there's enough comparability that it's like, why didn't that happen for me?
Sure. So
in my darkest hours, these are the people who like I think of and who, if I see them when I'm in the wrong mood, I'm like, I could be you. But then like the people that are closer to home are like pretty much every guest we've ever had on this podcast. Christina knows that her name is on this list. Before we were really good friends, I was like very jealous of Christina because of 2 main things. So the first is like the very shallow, like Christina has a huge, gorgeous body of work. And, it was such a fucking hard path for me to make the little bit of work that I do have. And I have a decent body of work, but you know, the production quality is not nearly as consistent as Christina's. And when she and I became closer and like I was becoming more familiar with her work, it was like, God, there's so much work here and it looks so much better than mine. Like I would not be embarrassed to show any of her work. And I am embarrassed sometimes, even of the things that I'm really proud of, especially in context of, you know, these other people. And she doesn't live that far from me and she's not that much older than me. And like, God, I wish I had this body of work. And then the other piece of it, which informs that, is that you had a much better team than I did. Not better in terms of like, they're more talented, but it was, you had people who were more committed and you had more of them because you went to more traditional film school. So you had people that you were coming up with, which we've talked about in this podcast. I didn't. I met everyone through a writing graduate program, and I got lucky that a handful of people in my class had filmmaking experience, but like my network was much smaller. And even the people that I did work with regularly, their commitment level was very different than, you know, starting a company, an LLC with, in your case. And like, honestly, that was more what I was jealous of than anything, especially as I got to know you, is like, God, I wish I had, you know, this support system, a support system that was willing to work as hard as I know yours does and that you do. And I was like, God, I wish I had that. And again, all of this caveating, I know there are things behind the scenes. I know that there, you know, you probably don't feel like, yes, everyone should be jealous of me in my situation. I am the like icon for indie filmmaking. But like, you know, from the outside as learning, you know, like there are things about your life and career so far and your art that I'm like, God, I wish that were me. Insert meme here.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting you say that from like a body of work perspective, because of course there are things I'm embarrassed to show from like that I made yesterday. You know, I think it's interesting because my like the chip on my shoulder is that I have this huge body of work and it can't speak for itself. When someone else comes in and has one short, but it has like the right name in it and it has perfect production value, because I definitely like cut corners and have, you know, I made a feature in crunchy ass snow and like thought that was a good idea for some reason. And so my like sound isn't amazing in Summit and things like that, where it's like someone who had a real budget or just like 5 times my budget and access to names and a camera that, like, let's be real, as much as we talk about it doesn't matter the camera because you can do so much with color grading and it's about how you use it and framing and all of that. At the end of the day, like a higher end camera, if you use it right, which is like the thing, because plenty of people use a high end camera poorly because they don't know what they're doing and then it looks bad.
And I have produced their web series and it looks like shit.
But if you use it right, just generally is going to look a lot more cinematic than like a DSLR or a cell phone or anything like that. And so the point I was making is like someone can make one short and just like get into Sundance and suddenly
and ride that wave to the rest of their career.
And I have made such this huge body of work that some people are like, oh my God, I'm so jealous of you that you've been able to do it and do it and do it. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm still like, I haven't had that one big thing. And part of it is because how I've prioritized things. I would rather tell many stories that I'm excited about than put all of my eggs into one story that will be like 7 years of my life. Like I can't, that's not me, you know? But it comes at the cost of then like having the highest production value in one particular thing that's like a calling card of sorts. I'm much more about just like variety and wanting to tell the story I'm passionate about in that moment. And so I would say like I'm jealous of people who I think find their voice sooner in less projects and then like know what they are. And so you're someone like that who I think you've made less, but you know what you want to be doing and what you are doing. And I don't know. So it's like, that's why I go back to just it's silly. Like, it's silly to be jealous.
I mean, of course it is. And like we started this conversation from the perspective of like, none of this is rational.
Right.
Like if it was rational, then nobody would be jealous.
Right.
So like, you know, that, but I think it's important to talk and be honest about like, these are some, you know, these are the dark moments and this is why, but it is helpful. And hopefully this podcast is helpful, not just specifically this episode, but our whole podcast is helpful in understanding like somebody looks very successful. What else is going on? What did you have to sacrifice? What did you hope that the thing that people are jealous of would do for you? And what did it actually do for you? Like a lot of our guests who have done really well also still have day jobs. That are not just in the traditional film and television world. And even those that do, you know, are constantly hustling and sometimes working on things that they're maybe not as creatively fulfilled by.
Right.
And so, you know, when I tweeted about if anyone had questions or comments for this episode, the only response I got was a very good one. Brendan Gallagher on Twitter. Brendan Gallagher, I don't know if you actually listen to this podcast, but we are mutuals on Twitter, and I like your Twitter quite a lot. I'd be very curious to know if you're listening to this episode. But he quoted Chris Fife, who is a showrunner, in response to the prompt, like professional jealousy. And apparently Chris Fife's quote is, "Don't look in other people's windows. You can't see everything going on in the house," which I think is a nice distillation. That's very true.
Yeah.
And something worth remembering is that, like, you know, from the outside in, not knowing Christina very well, she's made all this work. It all looks great. Like, holy shit, I wish I was her. And then when you get a little closer, it's like, yes, but what did you have to sacrifice to make all of that work? How many sleepless nights did you have? You know, how many date nights did you miss out on? How many things did you wish would come from these that didn't? You know, it's like, it's awesome, you know, what you've done, and you still are not fully satisfied. And that's also a part of the picture that when you're looking at someone jealously through no real like filter, you ignore in service of like, yeah, but I still want what you have. It's like, well, that's not the whole story. Are you sure you want what I have?
Right. I think like, you know, that's why if I'm going to be jealous of anyone, I prefer to focus it on people I actually know, because then I can rationalize myself out of the feelings, because I can say like, well, I know things about their personal lives that give me context to differentiate myself from. I can't do that necessarily with people from afar. I don't know, like maybe they do have the like work-life balance that I am aspiring to have as well. And they have, you know, time with their spouse and their pets and they get to like eat out at restaurants and sleep in as much as they would like, that lines up with how much I would like. And so then it's like, well, now they have all of the things plus this career thing that I want. So then I'm like, well, that's like that. I'm comparing myself to what I imagine to be like apples to apples, right? It's easier.
Like the idealized version of myself.
Right. But it's easier in a way to like channel it towards people I know, because then I can be like, well, you're just being ridiculous because you don't want these choices that they've made. You don't want this life that they have in these specific ways.
Did you used to be jealous of people further flung? Because like this is all a very reasonable take on things. And I'm impressed at your self-control. Like I don't have that kind of self-control. I mean, I do, because I don't think that professional jealousy rules my life so much as like burnout and general dissatisfaction with my own lot in life unrelated to anyone else. But like, you know, is that a conscious like shift that you took like in your early 20s? Were you much more jealous of further away people, or has this always just been kind of your like, oh no, that's ridiculous to be jealous of them, but like you person across from me at coffee right now, like fuck you?
I think it's just life experience, because I grew up being the poor kid in a middle class suburb, and so I was always like the kid with Payless shoes while everyone else had brand name shoes. And in high school in particular, I talked about this in, I think, our first episode, that I sold candy for 10 months to pay for a camera that I wanted and a MacBook, because I wanted to make a feature and edit it. And I didn't know what I was doing. I never finished that feature, but I did sell candy in my school, like secretly, because the school had gotten rid of the
vending machines.
Thank you. They had gotten rid of the vending machines. And so anyway, there was a boy who also wanted to be a director in my class, and his parents just like bought him a camera that was the same, it was a Canon, but it was the higher model than mine. And he had like basically a whole studio in his house. And I felt competitive with him. And whenever I was given the opportunity, I would ask to do a video project instead of like a PowerPoint or something like that. And he would do the same. And his was always like so much better than mine from a technical perspective. And it would like, that was like seething jealousy. It was like, why is his so much better? It can't just be that he's better. And like, of course, my imposter syndrome would be like, well, he is, obviously he's just better. I'm not very good at this. But then, you know, having to really rationalize, like, he was a rich kid. He like lived in a fucking mansion, and I had to like raise my cousins after school every day. So I didn't have the time to even put into like making the project look that good, but also I didn't have the technical like software and stuff. And so that, I think, was just kind of like my lived experience of being like the underdog in a way,
Sure.
from a class perspective. So that sort of set me up for this world of the industry where it's not just like one kid in my you know, local environment, but it's like the entire world around me.
Sure.
Where I'm comparing myself. It was really in college just starting to see how much class played into who has more advantages directly when it comes to creating art. Because even as I knew it, I didn't like fully know it. I was very naive, you know, about how much was stacked against me in terms of actually being able to like make it a career. It wasn't until I started to really like see the comparisons of just being able to pay for more film when we were shooting on film in school, you know, and those things. And so I've grown to this point. So I think those all just kind of like connect to me. I've always kind of been like, I'm not looking in other people's windows because there's no point. Like, what would be the point in really comparing myself? Because I just know that there's so much I'm not aware of that's helping them. And that may not always be the case, but my personal class, like level in society, has changed drastically from what I grew up with, and even just like what it was 5 years ago because of my husband's career success and the trajectory of his career and income. And so like, I know the advantages I have now that I didn't have 5 years ago, and how much of an impact that has made on my ability to pursue a career and to make work. And so, yeah, like that was a very long-winded way of saying that I think it's important. Yeah. So it's like a mix of upbringing and conditioning, and also growth as well, like conscious growth.
Sure. Yeah. I think I was talking to you. Was I talking to you about how much more mature I feel from the beginning of the pandemic to right now, to January 2022? Because like, I think I certainly, right before the pandemic started, was in like a much weirder place professionally in general, and like in my mindset. And like, even just since the pandemic, being forced to be inside, watching exclusively like from the internet how people are doing and how I'm doing, and, you know, all of the bizarreness of these last 2 years, like I have gotten a lot better at compartmentalizing and about like having more self-aware days than not of like, okay, if I'm being honest with myself, yes, I covet this person's career, this person's accomplishments, this person's whatever. But like, not only could I take a second and realize what they have that I don't, that probably explains it, but also I can be honest about the fact that like, you know, at the beginning of 2020, I hadn't developed a new pilot sample since 2017. And even that pilot sample was only okay at best. And it wasn't until I turned that pilot sample into a web series that it even went anywhere. So like, you know, yeah, I want a career. I want the work that I've already done to speak for itself, so I can just start being hired. It is super frustrating that truly so much of our work is like dependent on us putting up a bunch of effort and capital over and over and over again, making new work, developing new ideas, making it all perfect until it's the right kind of perfect for the right timing. And that sucks. Like, both of us have made so much great work that should speak for itself, and we should be able to just sort of wait for the right person to show it to, but that's not realistic. And I know that's not realistic. And so I really had to get my ass in gear of like, you can't just sit on what you think is already pretty good. You have to keep working on new stuff. Not only was it just not healthy for me to be as stagnant as I was, but also pushing myself to do more and accept the circumstances of this industry before I give up entirely, at least, led me to write one of my favorite things that I've ever written. And then more recently, I wrote another one of the things that's one of my most favorite things I've ever written. That one's not very good yet. The first one's very good. This second one, not good at all. But I had so much fun writing it and coming up with it. And like, I wouldn't have done that if I just sat around waiting for Dead on Arrival to get me a job, you know?
Right.
And it's certainly helpful, like kind of bringing this back to the conversation we were having about like people only posting their wins and that kind of stuff, is like part of that is having something to be posting about. Like if you're not working, if you're just waiting on, you know, your laurels, on your literal laurels, on your metaphorical laurels, on your body of work that's already made and available, like you have nothing new to update people with. So like if you're networking, if you're going to coffee, you don't really have anything to say. And so like, yeah, you're jealous of them, but you also have nothing new to update them with. So where is this conversation going to go? How are you going to maintain these connections? And so that was something that like, I had to be honest with myself about, that like I hadn't been doing. I hadn't been making anything new.
I think it is about finding sort of a healthy balance, because I think competition can also be motivating. It motivates me, like seeing someone get better and seeing someone like get to a new level. That's exciting because it's like, oh, that's possible. And I think it's finding that sweet spot of like that twinge of jealousy motivates you to want to get there too, and like do what it takes to get there. But then you also want to keep the perspective of like, okay, but sometimes it's not actually possible for you because of what that particular thing is and who that particular person is, and like what their context is, what access they already have, or just what advantage they already have, or just the way the system is built, that there's only like one person who gets that one thing for whatever reason, and it's like this kind of person. And so I think like so for myself, I don't turn off looking at other people's stories, people who I, you know, quote unquote, I'm jealous of. I don't ignore looking at the stuff that's going to spark that in me, because I think that spark can be good. It can be motivating, but it's also just like being conscious of when it's too much, because if you're having like a bad mental health day where you're feeling particularly pessimistic about yourself, your career, the world, whatever, maybe that's a day to avoid being on social media and putting yourself in a position to get thrown, you know, a bunch of success at you that is in the realm of what you want and you have nothing going on.
Yeah, don't use it as an excuse to punish yourself. Like if it's going to motivate you, great. And like, you know, keep that spark. But if you're looking at something like because you know it's going to be hurtful to see somebody's success, in whatever way, you know, that manifests in professional success, health success, relationship success, then like that's a form of self-harm. And like the psychologists have talked about it in terms of that, is like when you seek out information you know is going to upset you because you're already in a dark place and you're like, yeah, I want to really rub it in. Like that is a form of like psychological self-harm, and don't do that. And, you know, it's not always as simple as, well, just don't do that. But like, certainly part of being in this industry is having to train the muscle of like knowing the difference in your own mood and being honest with yourself about why you're looking right now and why you aren't, and maybe only letting stuff come to you or curating your feed so that you're only looking at it when you're in the right headspace and you're not actively seeking it out in weird places. And I would also say that like something that we've touched on, not just in this episode, but in a lot of episodes of our podcast, is the thing that Christina brings up a lot, which is being realistic with yourself about like, I have priorities that are separate from my professional life. And I need to be honest with myself that it is not productive to be jealous of people who are willing to do stuff I'm not. Like for the longest time, I was obsessed with having a YouTube career, not because by the end of it, I wanted to be on YouTube, but because of the opportunities I saw YouTubers who seemed as personable as me and as good at editing videos as me getting, you know, but if I'm being realistic with myself, I don't want to dedicate the time it takes to have a YouTube career, to make content that regularly, to like make myself the content. I don't want to do that. So why would I be jealous of YouTubers if I'm not willing to be a YouTuber? Like, I can't just think like, oh, I wish I had their career. Yes, I will be famous on YouTube tomorrow. Like, that's unrealistic. If I want to work towards that, if I want to study their path, sure. Eventually, like, I will earn that jealousy. But like, yeah, I've come to a point where I'm like, I feel like I have to earn the jealousy.
Yeah.
And if you're jealous of someone that you're close to, remember that it's not about you, especially when like they're having a successful moment. Like, friend of the pod and former guest Brandy Nicole Payne is officially a TV staff writer. Very, very exciting stuff. Congrats, we're so excited for her. I got brunch with her not long ago, right before she started her room. And it was a room that she was the writer's assistant for the season beforehand. And like, you know, there were points in that conversation where it took every bit of energy to not just like pester her with questions about exactly how she got that job and who did she talk to and could she get me a job. But I didn't, because it's not fucking about me. Like, yeah, am I disappointed that I am not in her position, that we're not having brunch together and both celebrating a huge career win? Yeah, of course it sucks. Because like, I'm definitely not where I want to be right now. But I also am, if I take a second and a deep breath, genuinely so fucking excited for her. She has worked so hard. She is so talented. She is so tenacious. Like, she absolutely 100% deserves this. I can't wait to see what she does next. And reminding myself to focus on that aspect genuinely does make me less jealous, because that becomes like a much lesser emotion. And sometimes it's about like replacing an emotion rather than just trying to suppress an emotion entirely. So that's something that I have found helpful, is like, especially for people that you love and respect and are a little bit jealous of, replace the jealousy, or at least try to override the jealousy or balance out the jealousy with how hopefully genuinely excited and ecstatic you are for them and all that they are going to get to do next. Not in a selfish way of like, ooh, if I seem nice, maybe they'll get me a job. Like, people can fucking sniff that out. Be genuinely excited for them for the sake of both of your relationship and mental health, and leave it at that. I cannot recommend that enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also it's hard because some people maybe really are not satisfied with any aspect of their life at the moment. So that can be hard. And I'm, you know, I feel like we both talk about our relationships frequently enough that maybe it like annoys some people who don't have that and want that, or maybe people that are just like, shut up, like I don't care. But they
well, you should get your own podcast. Listen to last episode, make your own podcast and be completely devoid of any sort of happiness and joy. That's fine.
Right.
Love that for you.
But for me, I also, to your earlier question, have gotten better at not comparing and not like looking in other people's houses, because I'm genuinely just like satisfied with my own in a foundational way, which like I is maybe not helpful if you're like I said earlier, maybe, you know, you're going through a rough patch in all areas, and that can be hard, and I've been there. But looking at like what you're grateful for, looking at what parts of your life are going in a way that you either hoped or planned or just like came out of nowhere, but you're happy about it. Yeah, they're working out. And so I think that like that helps me, because I'm like back to priorities. Like, yeah, I don't have exactly what I want, or I'm not where I exactly plan to be at this point career wise, but I have these things in my life that I'm so grateful for and I'm so happy to have. And I'm so, like, I wouldn't trade a career, like career success in for. I think that is like really important, is thinking about what you wouldn't trade that you have. Because like we've been saying, most people are sacrificing something to get wherever they are, and it may not be like, you know, an entire relationship or having a pet. Like Brianna, you were talking off pod about getting a dog, and it's like that's a responsibility. And someone who's like bi-coastal maybe and is like pursuing different careers, because I have a friend who's bi-coastal and she's like killing it on both coasts, but she doesn't have pets, she doesn't have responsibilities that like, you know, that
are beyond
kind of
her own well-being,
right, and that like tie her to a specific place. And I wouldn't give that up for anything, to have my cats. Like, they bring me so much joy. And so those are things that I think help you contextualize just the pieces that you think are missing, if you really focus on the pieces that aren't.
And I also think it's important to remember when it comes to professional jealousy that like professional is not the only part of your life that matters. And I think that that's something that gets really out of proportion for especially like artistic people, because like, in film, TV, art, more than any other career kind, I would say it's not just a career, it's a calling,
Right.
Most people are
It's
not
like
in
your
this
life's
because it's a
purpose.
paycheck. Yeah, exactly. And I think that sometimes people can get so focused on that they forget to have a life. And that was something that by the end of 2021, and I think I probably talked about this in Burnout, that I was starting to notice the effects of, is like, I don't want to live a life constantly wishing for a different life. I don't want to waste my life. And I think you talked about this too, Christina.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want to waste our life waiting for a different life to start. Like, I'm not going to stop being ambitious and pursuing things that I do really want. But like, if that's the only thing I'm focused on, if that consumes me, then what an awful, wretched existence that would be. And so, I'm lucky, as is Christina, that I have a, wonderful romantic relationship at home. Tremendously helpful to me just on every level. He cooks most of my meals. It's great. I think that's the same in your household too, right? We both got boys that cook.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Love to cook.
But like, there are a lot of things in my life that, it's not even about trading, that I just, regardless of where my career is at, I am so grateful for, completely separate from my career. I am grateful for where I am in a lot of ways. I have wonderful friends. I have things that I do that I enjoy doing with people that I enjoy doing them with. I love my new apartment. Like, there are so many things that I am grateful for. And that helps put in perspective, like, yeah, I'm not where I want to be in my career. Yeah, I don't want to be working the things that I'm currently working. But also, that's just one part of my life.
Right.
And, sometimes your life needs a little more maintenance on non-professional things. And yes, that might set behind your professional stuff, but it's probably for the best. Fill your cup before you fill others. Fill your personal cup before you fill your professional one. Like, you have to have something to give to your calling in order for you to like answer the call.
Right.
If we want to use the metaphor.
Yeah, that's something that I'm constantly working on, and especially over the last 2 years, is trying to not define myself by the like passion that I have as a career, like that I can be something other than a filmmaker, It's the two things that I think are hard early on when people would ask me what I do, and I would say like, oh, I'm a filmmaker. They would be like, oh, what do you really do though? Because that's not a real, like a thing. That's not a real job. Or they would be like, have I seen any of your work? And I'm like, no, you haven't. So then they're like, okay, so you're not really a filmmaker, So I think part of my like chip on my shoulder was to prove that it is like a real tangible career, and that's what I am. And now I'm like trying to go in the opposite direction of letting go of that need to legitimize my passion in like a capitalist society. Do you know what I mean? And so, because the last thing I want to do also is like lose the thing that brings me joy, which is like telling stories, and make it all about just like a means to an end, having a job and surviving in this capitalist society. And so it's trying to find that middle ground. And that's part of why I've also been off of social media lately more, because I've been trying to exist outside of just my brand as a filmmaker. And so then I'm kind of like, well, I don't even know what to post if it's not going to be branding, and I can't just have stories all day of my cat sleeping on the couch. I mean, I could, but
you could.
I could. Yeah. But,
do what brings you joy. Don't do what you think will build your brand.
I'm still finding that balance. And so I've kind of pulled back to do more introspection and to work on figuring out what it is I actually want my life to look like on my career front. Because the hard thing about filmmaking for me is that it's not a solitary art. Like,
Sure.
it's not, I can write a screenplay, but it doesn't feel finished. It doesn't feel like I've done the thing. I haven't made the art until it exists as a film. And so I have this feeling of it being incomplete, but then making it a film is so much work, and I have to raise money and I have to get all these people involved. And that's so hard when I don't have funding and resources. And so it's not like...
And there's a pandemic that makes everything 10 times harder and more unsafe.
Right. And so, like, if I'm jealous of anyone, I would say it's often people who have a passion for a specific art that they can do all by themselves. Because they can feel a sense of, like, completion without having to make it, like, profitable and marketable and fundable, you know?
You need more non-monetizable hobbies, Christina.
I do, but I think, like, it goes back to the thing that I so enjoy is being on set, making a thing with people. And it's trying to like maintain that feeling of this is a fun collaborative project, not that it has to be like the thing that pays my bills for the rest of the year, because that's just so hard to achieve in the system as it currently exists. And there's no point in like being jealous of the small 1% of people that are able to do that, because really, like, I don't know anyone, back to something you said earlier, most people who don't come from money and you know, access to the industry, they have full-time jobs. And so like most people are not actually sustaining themselves on their art.
Quote unquote living the dream.
Right. And so there's no point in like being jealous of the 1% that are doing that, because they're doing it through something that's just not at all attainable for me. Unless like I won the lottery, which I don't even play the lottery.
And it's like you shouldn't, you can't get jealous of lottery winners the same way that you can't get jealous of Charlie bit your finger. You know, like virality and lottery wins are so random. And like, you know, no matter how many startups try to like quantify and put that in a bottle, like you make us a viral marketing campaign, you know, like people who don't understand will always, you know, start to make us doubt ourselves about like, oh yeah, we should just be able to like reverse engineer it. But like nothing in the film industry can be reverse engineered. Even as many case studies as we present to you all in our interviews and as granular as we get, like there is contradictions in it. You know, advice that Kim gives about getting into writers' rooms is in many ways the opposite of advice that Kira in a couple of episodes will give about getting into writers' rooms. And neither of them are wrong. They're both 100% correct. And I think that in some ways that's actually very helpful to me. Like it's frustrating, but it's helpful at the same time, because it's like, at least I know that I haven't made a mistake.
Right. You've been authentic to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to feel like I've made a mistake in my career. I mean, I'm sure I've made many mistakes in general, but like, you know, it sometimes film careers are presented as like, you have to make X number of correct decisions and then you are in, you know, like there's a checklist. And if you mess it up, then you set yourself back 5 years. But like nothing is as clear cut as that. And it's helpful to hear how many different ways people succeed in ways that I hope to succeed eventually. And feel comfort in the fact that like I have not precluded myself, you know, I have not pre-canceled myself.
I think it, you know, it just, we live in a society, the industry is a reflection of society at large. And so the people that are celebrated are these people that often already had a way in or already like making it. So it's like, oh, breakout star, ones to watch. And it's always people that have like either been hustling for like 15 years, but they're being presented as an overnight success, or they're people who had, you know, access already. It's like the Forbes articles that are like self-made millionaires, and it's like
Kylie Jenner is the first self-made billionaire. Like, okay.
Yeah, right. Yep. And so
Kylie Jenner, she is an island and she made it herself.
Right. And so you have to, I think society like is just constantly gaslighting us a lot of the time.
I mean, true success defies a simple narrative, and that's not what anyone wants. And we have to get over that. there is no simplicity, and as much as it often annoys me whenever like one of those Forbes 30 under 30 lists come out, everyone's like, where is the Forbes 50 over 50? Like every single, person with a stick up their butt, like post that. And I'm like, I agree, but please be quiet because you're also being annoying. But like, they're not wrong.
Yeah,
and like there are plenty of examples of people who found, incredibly fulfilling careers later in life. Alan Rickman as an example. And I don't know Alan Rickman's life story, but it sounded like he wasn't fully miserable and then he was 53 and got a cool job and everything was peaches from there. Like I'm sure that also happens, but like I don't know. I'm trying to decouple my like sense of time being wasted or productive from my particular contentment in my own professional progress. And that's related to, but distinct from decoupling my identity from my productivity. They're part of the same toxic capitalist patriarchal worldview, but like they're the solutions to the problems are slightly different. And yeah, that's just like a thing that I'm sure I'll work on for the rest of my life, but is something that I'm at least much more conscious of now, is trying to like remind myself when I catch myself spiraling, and I will say, to just like round it out, at the end of 2021, Christina and I were in pretty dark places. And I don't think we were subtle about that in our episodes towards the end of last season. And I'll say for me, it's been a frustrating start to the year for a lot of reasons, but it's also been a really great reset, especially getting, a couple of weeks off of work. And I'm feeling much more hopeful. I'm feeling much better. I wrote a new script in the time since we talked last, and the royal we of our podcast audience, and I really like it, and I had fun doing it, and it reminded me again why I am doing all of this work because I like writing silly little stories, and I enjoy that process, and I enjoy sharing them. And I have a very long email to get to after this from my other podcast co-host, Christine, who recently read one of my other pilots and gave me a ton of notes. And I am so excited to dig into them because she hadn't read this pilot yet. And she's the last person that I need to read it. And I can't wait for her to rip it apart so I can build it up better. And I'm trying to focus my energy on the things about this lifestyle that excite me. But before I get to those notes, I'm going to go have dinner with my fiance, and we're going to chat and maybe watch some TikToks that are silly. And we're just going to have a nice Friday night. And that is enough. I don't have the professional career that I want right now, but that's okay. Not because I am enlightened, but because it has to be. Because I would rather be okay than have this constant, weight on me. So choosing to be okay isn't always that simple, but it's something I'm trying to do more consciously and more regularly.
That's great.
Well, and we hope that our vulnerability and our candidness is, if not helpful, makes you at least feel like there's some solidarity. And I think we both are committed to continuing to be open and vulnerable. And in the spirit of vulnerability, we're running out of solo episode ideas. So please recommend upcoming episodes, whether you want us to go deep on maybe more ethereal topic like this, or like our imposter syndrome episode from season 1, or whether you're like, yeah, feelings, teach me about X. So whatever X is, or whatever feelings happens to be, please get in touch at Breaking Out Pod on Twitter and Instagram, or breakingoutofbreakingin@gmail.com.
That's right. Thanks so much to Kelsey Rauber for our theme music, Kaylee Brown for our podcast art, Ezra Lee for editing this episode, and to all of you for listening. Links to learn more about them are in our episode description.
And thank you to our booby VIPs, who are our $10 supporters on Patreon, including Kim Garland, Amanda Blunt, Anthony Epp, Kelsey Rauber, Norman Steinberg, Jerry Maravilla, and Brandy Nicole Payne. If you want your name on that list, and or to have access to our bonus resources related to each and every episode, you can subscribe for as little as $3 to our Patreon at patreon.com/breakingoutpod.
Or join our free newsletter where we share a new creative prompt each month. And next episode, we'll be discussing directing TV movies with special guest Pratna Mohan. Be sure to tune in.